Do you want to learn how to use multiband compression and get a more balanced mix and fix issues in your mix? Then this video will help you to learn about multiband compression. I will tell you what is compression, what is multiband compression, what's the difference between those two, what is the advantage of multiband compression, when you should use multiband compression, how to use multiband compression, and what are the disadvantages of multiband compression so that you can avoid using it when you don't need it. And also, if you watch this video till the end, I will promise you that I give you some pro tips which will help you to be even better at multiband compression. So avoid common pitfalls and really bring your mixing game to the next level. So we have downwards compression, upwards compression, downwards expansion, and upwards expansion. And today we will talk mostly about the compression type, but I want to quickly give you an overview what everything is. So downwards compression is whenever we have a threshold and the signal is exceeding this threshold, then we are lowering the signal in volume, so we downwards compress it, we make it less loud. So then comes upwards compression, is we also have a threshold, but if we are not reaching that threshold, we are increasing the volume of the signal to make it louder. And now to the expansion types, we have upwards expansion, so the same like with the downwards compression is, we have a threshold, and if we are going upwards that threshold here, then we're expanding the signal. So we're not squeezing it this time. So we're making it not smaller, the signal, we're kind of like increasing it. So we're giving it more dynamic range again. And with downwards expansion, it's like if we are below a certain threshold, then we bring the signal down. So this can be useful if you kind of like want to make a signal faster disappear at a certain level. But now to how is multiband compression actually different from normal compression? It already says it in the name, it's multi-band. So you have multiple bands. In a normal compression, you're taking the whole signal and you're looking at this whole signal, and whenever it crosses that threshold, we do something with the signal, depending if we up, downwards, compress or expand it. And with multiband, it's the same thing, but we are only looking at a certain frequency spectrum and a certain band of frequencies. So you could say like a low band, like you have in kick and bass mostly, or a mid band, like you have in the leads, or a high band, or some custom defined bands by you. So why should you use multiband compression, and what's the advantage of it? So the advantage is basically that it can work more precise. So maybe you have a signal which is only in the high band too high. So let's say you have, for example, like a kick where the click is too high. I mean, you can tackle that with normal compression for the experts of you who will comment that, but it might be a little bit easier to do that with multiband compression, because in the multiband compression, you can say, I only want to focus on that part of the kick which is in the highs. And in a lead, it can be the same. So maybe you have your lead in the lower mids, in the mids, and in the higher mids, but it only has a problematic area in one of those areas because it's maybe too harsh. So you only want to address the higher mids maybe. So to sum it up, it gives you more nuances, it gives you more control over the signal, you can go more precise, and with going more precise, you have the advantage of not affecting too much of the signal, so you can really work like a surgeon on your audio signal. And if you like the video so far, then please hit the thumbs up button. That helps me to spread the video, and also it shows me that you are interested in this kind of topics and I can make more content like this. So when should you use multiband compression? As I already said, if you have a problem in a certain band only, then this is something you can usually fix with multiband compression. So for example, to tame harshness or to control the low end in a bass, for example. So that's all examples which you basically have more advantages if you're using the multiband compression compared to normal compression. But be careful, I will go in a sec also into the disadvantages. And usually before you start using multiband compression or compression in general, you should always consider trying to use the mixer, so the level of the signal, and also try to EQ it first, because that usually helps you to solve a lot of problems which then you don't need to solve with a compressor. But every advantage comes also with some disadvantages, and some disadvantages of multiband compression are that you can change the phase. So you can distort the phase, you have a different phase in your signal than before. You can have a tonal distortion so that the sound doesn't sound the same, so you have a different tonal balance. So for example, if you take all the highs down, then you may end up with a completely kind of like different sounding sound in the end. And you have intermodal distortion. That's something if kind of like tones mix and you get like inharmonic frequencies in. So if you're aware of the overtone series, you can check that out on YouTube. It's if you have a signal, you usually get like overtones, and by having intermodal distortion, you can change that and bring in more frequencies which are not in this harmonic series. So to sum this a little bit more up, I think the most important disadvantage here is the tonal change. So be really careful to not destroy your sound just because maybe it has a few too many highs. It's sometimes better to kind of like leave this a little bit skewed balance, but keep the synthesis and the function you had in mind when you created a sound. Also, you can alter the sense of space sometimes, and it's a little bit more difficult to set up, I would say, than an EQ or normal compression. As you have more options, you have more points where you can actually screw up things, and sometimes the easy things are the best. And the last point I want to mention, it's very CPU intensive, so I usually use it more in the mixing stage and not when I'm still in the creation of stuff. Besides something is really bugging me hard during my production, then I go with a multiband compression before the mixing stage. So I have this lead here, which I actually screwed up a little bit on purpose for you guys to make a demonstration of how we could use the multiband compression in here. As I mentioned, usually I would solve this with EQ, and actually I have solved this with EQ in this project here, but I want to give you an example here. So as you notice, I'm already using this very rarely in my project. So that's why I even didn't find an example in my current project. How I use this? The first thing is obviously we need to select a VST which we want to use. And just to say it, the stock plugins are really good in Ableton, and don't be shy to use them. But if you have invested a little bit into mixing and mastering stuff, I have this fab filter stuff and I'm really satisfied with that, to be honest. The next step we need to do then is we need to select the bands. So we need to listen to the sound, identify where the problems are, and then define our bands. And just to say this, we don't need to apply compression or anything in every band. So usually I just pick like 1, 2 or 3 bands with problematic areas, and then I set them up. So the sound has too much highs. So I want to set like a high band to fix that. Like here. And it has also some lows we might want to control, like low mid thing to mids. And then we could add like a middle band. So what I want to do with this sound, or what I want to try with this sound, reducing the low band a little bit, pushing the mid band, and reducing the high band. So we have different types, as you remember from the beginning. We have now upwards and downwards compression in this compressor set up simultaneously. So the first thing I usually do is I put the thresholds up, because then you don't have any effect, or you shouldn't have much effect. Actually, you have an effect, because even setting up those bands will give you a change in the sound. And it's actually important to set those bands like on a good range in the beginning, because that will actually change a lot how the signal will be processed later. So then I focus on the most problematic area first. So what I would do actually here is I would even apply like a negative gain first, which is a little bit like EQing, I guess. And I don't want to compress the signal all the time. I will choose a threshold which only gets hit certain times, because if you put it like this, then it will be compressed all the time. Then what's the point of it? Then you can just like dial down the level. So that's your first setting. The second setting, I would say, is the range. And I usually don't set the range too big. What I would recommend you, if it requires like a huge range here, then set up 2 compressors instead of 1, and it gets really complicated with multiband compression. That's what I mentioned earlier. It's easier with normal compression, and with normal compression I easily have sometimes 2 or 3 compressors behind each other, so that each compressor has to work a little bit less and doesn't affect the signal so drastically. Then I basically would set the attack, so if you want to attack it really fast, which kind of like usually pushes the thing a little bit more in the back in general with compression, and the release time, and usually if I have a faster attack, I also have a fast release, because that means the compressor will act fast, and if you don't release it, then usually also it stays down all the time. So that's something I usually combine, and I did wrong in the beginning that I did exactly the opposite. So let's set the attack. Actually, before we can set the attack, the threshold is so high here. So we need to reduce that a little bit. I did this on purpose to be mean. So this we definitely don't want to have here. It's just for the example. So we can see this is the output level, so that's why it's always decreasing. We can do a little bit less as I reduced it here. And then we want to have this triggering. You want to have this moving here, and only moving in the peaks where you really hear the peaks. So if we would A/B this here, you only want that where that kind of like penetrant thing comes in, you want to go that really down here. Like this maybe. And then you have a ratio. So the ratio is, if you're crossing your threshold and you have an infinitive ratio, then it's basically cutting everything. And if you have less than infinity, then it's cutting like less steep. So depending on how high you set this, it's compressing more or less once it crosses that threshold. And then we have the knee. The knee is basically if it bends that compression. So if it starts already like applying it a little bit earlier to make it more rounded. Actually, you can see this very well here on the Ableton compressor. So if I put this up, you really see how this window here, so we have our threshold here, and if that window kind of like goes before and after it, so that it doesn't go so much on the point, it kind of like gets like a range in which it acts. And once we have set this up, we will focus on the next problem. So maybe we can reduce here as well a bit. But here, I want to do it way more gentle. Maybe we set even a limit for like 1.5 dBs. Also, I feel we don't need to be as fast as we are here because we don't have that kind of like penetrating sound here. So we can set this kind of like reacting a little bit slowlier. We can also maybe use a not as crazy ratio here. So here we use maybe like a high ratio like this, and then we use maybe something like this here. And we can try with hard and soft. Usually my experience is the softer you go here, the more the sound also goes a little bit into the back. It reduces the sharpness of the sound. So if you have like a pad, for example, I use like a lot of knee there because that's a sound you may usually want to have more in the background. And you can also adapt your crossovers once in a while. And then we come to this middle part here, and this time we actually want to put the range positive. So then we are upwards compressing. Whenever it's below our threshold, it will go up. To show you a little bit more. So we are here. You see, when it comes here, it does nothing. Only if we put it like a little bit higher. And most important, listen to it in context and see if it's good and see if it improved. So always try to A/B things. So usually what I do is like this. So I A/B it first without anything, and if I think it did an improvement, then usually I tweak it a little bit and then A/B which version does more to the sound. So here the sound becomes very thin because we artificially pushed it here with the EQ a lot. But on the other version we did compress, it sounds more balanced and it sounds more there, it sounds more strong actually. So that was the example. It was a quick example and maybe not the best because I artificially pumped it, but I hope you got it. And if you have a question, you can always ask in the comments and I will respond to that. So if something wasn't clear in this explanation, then just tell me in the comments and maybe I make even another video about this. And one thing which is also really important, which we need to check, is the slopes here. It's something which always gets kind of like forgotten, but if you would set up an EQ, it would be definitely something you would do. You would say if it's a 12 dB per octave slope or it's an 18 dB or 36 dB, because that really influences your result. So let's do this as well here. So let's take a listen. And by the way, what this does is, if you have like a higher slope, then the separation between the bands becomes more distinct. And if you have like a lower slope, then everything will be more like one unit, which is actually not a bad thing, because you might be a little bit less precise, but you're also less distorting the sound and you are less drastic on the sound, and everything sounds a little bit more than before as things get affected in combination, you know? So here I would maybe choose like a higher slope as I really want to control this. And here I would choose like a lower slope because this part can actually work a little bit more together, I think. And then becomes like less this three bands which get like hardcore pushed, like one pushed up, one pushed down. And I think that makes a little bit more justice to the sound in that area, while this here leads a little bit more attention. As you remember, was like our initial problem we wanted to solve here. And then what you definitely want to do is you want to listen to this in context. So put the solo out. Do you notice how it gets less harsh, more thick the sound, and not so, so kind of like tilted to the high? It's more balanced actually, and that makes it like stronger in its appearance here. And once we have a setting which works really well, what you can also do is you can copy this over and then you can play a little bit. You can, for example, say, okay, we try like a really low slope here and maybe like a very high slope here. And then you can A/B this. So that's something I would always do. But I only do this if you have made an improvement. If you didn't have an improvement, then start all over, or don't apply the multiband compression at all if it doesn't work. So let's try this. but I like the original version more, to be honest. But that's then our starting point. So we could copy this again, and then we could try something else. We could try mess around with the bands, or whatever you feel could still make an improvement, you can try to apply and then compare again to the sound. And I want to give you some final pro tips how you really use multiband compression right. So first tip is don't overuse it. I know you're now excited to try this, and I know you are excited to try this on every sound you can, but you don't want to overuse this. You want to keep the tonal balance in your sound, and you can easily screw things up with applying too much processing to it. So always consider first trying to change the mix, the level of the sound, and to EQ it properly, because that will help you already to avoid a lot of problems which you want to fix with compression. Or even one step further, to be honest, try to solve it in the synthesis if you can. So for example, maybe you're opening a filter to crazy, or you have too much resonance in your filter, which creates those kind of like resonant peaks which you might not want to have in the end in your sound. So that's actually the best fix. So the closer you can be to the source, the less processing you need, the better it is. Then start gentle. As you have seen, I put up all the thresholds in the beginning so that it didn't affect the sound. So start with something which doesn't affect the sound too much, and then move fast. So what I usually do is I don't tweak the knobs like super slowly, because then your ears adapt on it. So move the knobs more like quickly, and then you have like more drastic differences. And about the differences, as I already mentioned, A/B everything, A/B sound with processing, without processing, different settings. If you're using the Ableton compressor, you can A/B things by just making a group, putting it twice with different settings, and then toggle between that group. So I made a short on that, so you can look for that on my channel, how you can basically A/B synths or A/B everything. I made 2 shorts about that, which help you to improve your A/Bing game and experiment a lot. Experiment with those things you also might not see, like crossover points, which are not so obvious in that multiband compressor. And also we didn't touch a lot of settings yet, so you can also set it to like mono and stereo mode. So do a lot of experimentation, and then listen really closely to the results. Really try to evaluate what you have done. So A/B it with, as I already said, with the original, and then really try to figure out what you did to the sound and why you did this to the sound. So just to give you an example for a normal compressor, if you set the attack too fast, and this is also true for a multiband compressor, then you can kill certain kind of like peaks in the sound, or a certain sharp and edginess of the sound, which might be a very important property of your sound. So be really careful to listen at it in solo, in perspective, leave it alone for like 15 minutes, work on something else, and then go back and A/B it again, because we often are biased once we do something that it sounds better even if it doesn't. And the last point is really have a reason for doing this. Think really of what you want to improve it, because reasons come before results. So if you don't have something in your mind you want to improve with that, then it will be hard for you to compare and evaluate and actually measure what you have improved with your sound.